Hi folks, happy Tuesday. Today's target is to identify manipulated, responding, and controlled variables in an experiment. Before we actually practice identifying these variables, let's take a minute and talk about what the differences between them are. So a manipulated variable is something that a scientist manipulates. It's something that a scientist changes. Okay. So on Wednesday, we went over an example of an experiment. We were talking about trees and trying to figure out why the colors of leaves on trees change and why they fall and things like that. And one hypothesis we made was we thought that maybe the temperature of the trees influenced the color that the leaves had. And so we decided, okay, what if we had an experiment where we had a tree outside and a tree inside? A tree that was cold and a tree that was warm, and we tried to see if one of the tree's leaves changed and if the others didn't. That's kind of what our manipulated variable was. Specifically, it was the temperature that the trees were at. And the second piece of that, the responding variable, the colors of the leaves, was effectively our data of the experiment. That's a great way to think about responding variables. They're like our data. Responding variables are things that change because of the manipulated variable. So I could change the temperature of the tree. I, the scientist, could change the temperatures that the trees are at, and that may change the colors of the leaves. Okay. Controls are things in an experiment that should never change. There might have been a little bit of lag there. Controls in an experiment are things that never change. For example, with my tree experiment, here, let's see. Controls never change. For example, with the tree experiment, the two trees should receive the same amount of water. They should be in the same type of soil. They should have the same kind of atmosphere that they're existing in. The two trees should be as genetically identical as possible, because if one tree is just, genetically stronger than the other, that could significantly weigh out or change the results. The two trees should be the same species of tree. All of those things are different controls that we can have to reduce error in our experiment. Really, the only things that should change in experiments are the manipulated and responding variables. However, sometimes there are uncontrolled variables that do create error in an experiment. Let's take a minute and do number 1 together as an example, and then I'll have you guys look at questions number 2 and number 3 and see if you guys can hit today's target. So, in number 1, we have a student, and they're trying to figure out which type of solid, which of these frozen solids melts the fastest. They've got soda, water, and orange juice in these little kind of ice cube trays. The student pours the liquids into the empty cubes of the ice tray and then places the ice tray in the freezer overnight. She then waits and watches. The next day, she pulls each ice tray out and sets each cube on its own plate. She waits and watches for them to melt, and when the last part of the frozen liquid melts, she records the time. So, what is this student, what is our scientist changing in this experiment? Well, from the looks of it, they're changing the type of substance that is in each tray. There are 3 different trays, and the scientist is choosing what goes in the tray. There we go. Okay, so why are they doing this? What is the data they are trying to collect? What are they hoping to get out of this experiment? That's going to be our responding variable. Okay. And in this particular case, the student is trying to determine which one melts the fastest. That's their data. That's why they've got 3 different substances. They're changing the substance to see which is going to melt fastest. And each one is going to melt a little bit differently. Some might be faster, some might be slower. So the speed that the frozen solid melts at, that is our responding variable. So this last one can be a little bit tricky. We're trying to figure out what are some things that this student doesn't change in the experiment. Well, let's take a look at the problem. What are some things that are the same each time she does the experiment? Each time that she does an experiment with soda, an experiment with water, or an experiment with orange juice, what's something that's going to be the same in between all of those little mini experiments? Well, we can see a couple of different things. The liquids are poured into empty cubes of an ice tray. So that is a control. Each liquid goes in an ice tray. None of the liquids are going in cups. None of the liquids are going in buckets. They're all going in the same kind of container. They're then placed in a freezer overnight. So they are all frozen for the same amount of time, and they're all placed in the same freezer. We only need 2, but let's see if we can find a couple more. She puts each ice cube on its own plate. So each one is getting a plate that is special for it, but each one goes on a plate. None of them are going in a cup. None of them are going in a pitcher. They're all going on a plate. That's the same. Each one goes on a plate. She then waits and watches for them to melt. You could argue that that is also a control, right? She watches them. It's not like, her younger brother is watching them melt, right? She's trying to remove that error because maybe her younger brother isn't quite as good of a timekeeper as she is or something like that. And when the last part of the frozen liquid melts, she records the time. Cool. So that's effectively what today's target is for you guys to be able to do what I just did, but do it on your own. With this next problem, we're going to kind of do this together, and we're going to do it in parts. Here. There we go. Okay. So, in problem number 2, a student wonders if you can dissolve more sugar in hot water, room temperature water, or ice water. He first dissolves out 200 mils of hot water and carefully adds 1 gram of sugar and stirs it until it all dissolves. He continues adding 1 gram of sugar and stirring until no more sugar will dissolve. He records how many grams of sugar he was able to add to the water. He repeats this experiment with room temperature water and then ice water. All right. So what is the manipulated variable? What is the scientist, the student, changing every single time he does this experiment? Well, from the looks of it, this student is changing the temperature of the water because it says hot water, room temperature water, or ice water. There are 3 different types of water, and each one has a different temperature. So what is our responding variable? Well, in this experiment, the student, first of all, what is a responding variable? And then what is the responding variable in this experiment? So I can give you the first one. A responding variable is like our data. It's what changes because of what our scientist changes. So what is this data that we're looking for in this experiment? So it looks like he's trying to figure out which one is going to dissolve more sugar. Right? Can we dissolve more sugar in hot water or in cold water or in room temperature water? Which is it? That's what he's looking for. That's what he's trying to figure out. That's his data. Which liquid dissolves more sugar? Okay. what are two things happening in this experiment, at least two things that are happening in this experiment, that the student is doing to keep the experiment fair, that they're not changing? So there's a couple of different things. One is we could say how much water he's using. Each time he does this experiment, it's with 200 mils of water. Okay. Let's find some more. He's adding 1 gram of sugar and stirring it until it all dissolves. So the amount of sugar added at a time is always the same. Yeah. There are a couple of other ones that we could use. I would say those two are the best. He is always doing this experiment, so it's always the student. He doesn't have, a younger sibling or a family member doing this experiment, so the person never changes. That's a great example of control as well. All right, let's continue on to the next problem. All right, so a student wants to figure out whether or not Miracle-Gro, it's kind of like this fertilizer, makes plants grow faster. The student takes 2 identical pots, puts half a cup of dirt into each one, puts 3 pea plant seeds into each one, and tops each off with 1/2 a cup of dirt. He waters the plants the same amount at the same time each day. The only difference is that one plant is watered with regular water, while the other is watered with water that has Miracle-Gro in it. All right. Can you do all 3 steps of today's target? Can you identify the manipulated variable, the responding variable, and the controls in this experiment? Good luck. So, the manipulated variable in this experiment is the thing the scientist changes. And the student changes whether the water, whether the water has Miracle-Gro, right? One of the plants gets watered with Miracle-Gro, the other one gets watered with water. And the reason the student is doing that is because they want to see whether or not Miracle-Gro actually makes the plant grow faster. So what are 2 things that happen in this experiment that, the student is doing to try and keep it fair, that the student isn't changing and it's exactly the same between the 2 different plants? Well, each one gets 3 pea plants. So there's 3 pea plant seeds. So there are 3 seeds and there are also pea plants. Those are both 2 different controls. 3 seeds each. Both pots get pea pods, pea seeds. Okay. There we go. So that's 2. We are also told that they're put into identical pots. So that's another control, identical pots. And what else do we have? How much dirt? Half a cup of dirt into each, and then another half a cup of dirt on top. Amount of dirt is the same. And each one gets watered the same amount at the same time each day. So those are also 2 controls. Same amount of water and timing of watering. Cool. So a bunch of different controls in this final experiment. I'll talk with you guys more on Wednesday, and we can continue with this unit. I'll talk to you then. Bye.